A waitress stepped outside and found a little girl trembling in the snow, unaware that she was the daughter of a single millionaire whose life was about to change forever. Before anything else, I need your help. Without your subscription, your comments and shares are our only hope of staying connected. Follow now to ensure we meet again. And now, let the story unfold. The snow was falling heavily over the streets of Manhattan, turning the city into a maze of diffused lights and icy shadows. Emma Martinez pulled her coat tighter around her body as she walked quickly along the slippery sidewalk. Her cheap boots scuffed against the wet concrete, echoing in the pre-dawn silence. Another double shift at Rosemary's Bistro had come to an end, leaving her back sore and her feet throbbing. 22 years old, and working 16 hours a day to pay for a closet-sized apartment in Queens, it wasn't exactly the future she had envisioned when she was a bright young law student at Harvard. The biting cold of the December air made her quicken her pace. She was only 3 blocks from the subway station when an almost inaudible sound made her stop. A low, muffled sob. Emma looked around, confused. Fifth Avenue was practically deserted at that hour, with only a few taxis occasionally passing by, their headlights cutting through the fog. Then she heard it again, a child's cry coming from an alley between 2 luxurious residential buildings. "Hello? Is anyone there?" Emma called out, her voice carrying a genuine concern that had become rare in her life over the past 2 years. She cautiously moved toward the sound, her maternal instincts speaking louder than any personal safety fears. What she found made her gasp in shock. A little girl, perhaps 6 years old, was huddled against the red brick wall, wearing only a green velvet dress and black patent leather shoes. Her golden hair was disheveled and wet with snow, and her skin was dangerously pale. The child was trembling violently, her lips already showing signs of hypothermia. "My goodness, sweetie, what are you doing here?" Emma immediately knelt beside the girl, taking off her own coat without hesitation. It was an old, patched-up coat, but it was warm. "What's your name? Where's your family?" "Sophia," the little girl managed to murmur through her shivers. I was in the car with Daddy, but I stopped at the candy store and when I came back, the car wasn't there anymore. Daddy must be looking for me." Emma felt a wave of indignation wash over her. What kind of father would simply drive away without checking if his small daughter was in the car? She wrapped Sophia in her arms, transferring the warmth of her own body to the freezing child. "Do you know where you live, Sophia? Or your daddy's phone number?" Emma asked gently while rubbing the girl's small arms to restore circulation. "I live in the Olympus Tower," Sophia said, still shivering. "Daddy always says it's the tallest building in the city, but I don't know his number. He's always at work." Emma knew the Olympus Tower, one of Manhattan's most expensive addresses, where apartments cost more money than she would earn in 10 lifetimes. Whoever this father was, he clearly had resources. But that didn't justify abandoning a child on a night like this. "It's okay, sweetie. We're going to get you warm and find your daddy, okay?" Emma lifted Sophia from the ground, surprised by how light the girl was. "There's a diner open a few blocks from here. We'll get some hot chocolate and call the police. They'll help find your dad." Sophia snuggled against Emma, and she could feel how desperately the child was seeking warmth and comfort. As she walked quickly through the empty streets carrying the girl who was now wearing her coat, Emma couldn't help but think about how some people had everything, money, property, power, but failed at the most basic things, like protecting their own children. Joe's diner was just as it always was at 3 in the morning, half empty, lit by fluorescent lights that occasionally flickered but warm and welcoming. Emma knew the place well. She had spent many late nights there studying for college exams, back in the days when her life still had direction and purpose. "Emma, darling, you brought company today," said Joe, the elderly owner who knew most of the neighborhood's night workers. His eyes immediately noticed Sophia's condition. "Jesus Christ, what happened to this little one? I found her lost on the street." "Sophia, this is Joe. He makes the best hot chocolate in town," Emma said softly as she helped the girl sit in a booth near the heater. "Joe, can you call the police? She's looking for her father." While Joe hurried to make the call, Emma took some paper napkins and gently began to dry Sophia's wet hair. The little girl watched her with large blue eyes that reminded Emma of someone, although she couldn't identify who. "You're very pretty," Sophia said suddenly, with the brutal honesty only children possess. "Why are you working so late? My nanny Irene always goes to sleep early." Emma smiled sadly. "Sometimes we have to work hard to get the things we need, sweetie. But don't you worry about it, okay? You just need to get warm now." Then the diner door opened so forcefully that the bell hanging above it vibrated violently. A tall man stormed in like a hurricane, his dark hair wet with snow, wearing a suit that cost more than Emma's annual salary. His gray eyes swept the room desperately until they landed on Sophia. "Sophia!" His voice was hoarse with relief and panic at the same time. "Oh my God, Sophia!" The little girl jumped out of the booth and ran toward the man. "Daddy, I told you I was going to the candy store. Why did you leave?" Alexander Reed, CEO of Reed Enterprises and one of New York's richest men, fell to his knees to embrace his daughter, his usual composure completely shattered. For a full hour, he had mobilized his building's security, private police, and half the city's investigators looking for the only thing that truly mattered in his life. "I thought you were in the car, baby girl. When I saw you weren't there." He stopped, unable to finish the sentence that terrified him. Then his eyes met Emma's, who was standing beside the booth, watching the reunion with a mix of relief and something harder to define. Alexander slowly stood up, still holding Sophia, and studied the young woman who had clearly taken care of his daughter. Emma was different from any woman in his social circle. There was nothing calculated in her posture, no attempt to impress or manipulate. She was wearing a cheap restaurant uniform and looked exhausted, but there was a natural dignity in how she carried herself, a quiet strength that he rarely found. "You found her?" he asked, his voice carrying an intensity that made Emma feel observed in a way she wasn't used to. "She was in an alley on Fifth Avenue, shivering from the cold," Emma answered directly, without taking credit or dramatizing the situation. "She was close to hypothermia. You're lucky she's okay." The way she said it, not as an accusation but as a fact, made Alexander realize that this woman wasn't afraid of him or his position. Most people in his life treated his every word as if it were sacred, but this waitress was clearly more concerned with Sophia's well-being than with impressing a rich stranger. "Thank you," he said, and Emma could tell that genuine gratitude was unusual for him. "I was on the phone with Asian investors when Sophia said she was going to buy candy. I thought she had gotten back in the car, but my driver—" "Daddy was too busy," Sophia interrupted with the brutal honesty of children. "He's always busy." But Emma gave me hot chocolate and told me a story about princesses. Emma saw something pass through Alexander's eyes: pain, guilt, recognition. This powerful man was being confronted by his own daughter, and Emma had to resist the urge to feel sorry for him. Any man who put business before his child didn't deserve compassion. "About that," Emma said, addressing Sophia directly but loud enough for Alexander to hear clearly, "all princesses need time with their kings, don't they, sweetie? Maybe your daddy can take some time tomorrow for you two to play in the snow." Alexander caught a flicker of what looked like amusement in his eyes when she said that. This woman was giving him parenting advice, him who had more business responsibilities than she could possibly comprehend. But when he looked at Sophia, who had brightened considerably with the suggestion, he realized that she was completely right. 3 weeks had passed since that night in the snow, but Alexander couldn't stop thinking about the waitress who had saved Sophia. He had tried to find her again at Rosemary's Bistro but discovered that she had quit the day after the incident. None of the employees seemed to know where she had gone, or at least they pretended not to know when a man in an expensive suit showed up asking questions. "Daddy, are you going to find Emma again?" Sophia asked for the 10th time that week, as Alexander tried to focus on financial reports in his office on the 47th floor of the Olympus Tower. The panoramic view of the city through the floor-to-ceiling windows usually calmed him, but today it only reminded him of how easy it was for people to get lost in the vastness of Manhattan. "I'm still looking, baby girl," he replied, and was surprised by how sincerely he wanted to find Emma again. It wasn't just gratitude for what she had done. There was something about the way she had looked at him without impression or fear that had become lodged in his mind. The intercom on his desk buzzed. "Mr. Reed, "There's a young lady down here who says she has something that belongs to Sophia," said Margaret, his always efficient assistant. Alexander's heart jumped. Could it be? "Send her up immediately." 5 minutes later, the office door opened and Emma Martinez walked in, carrying a small porcelain doll that Alexander immediately recognized as Sophia's favorite toy. But it wasn't the doll that captured his attention. It was how different Emma looked in daylight, in a professional setting. She was wearing a simple black dress and a gray cardigan, her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. There was a polished quality about her that seemed incongruous with her previous job as a waitress. "I believe this belongs to Sophia," Emma said, placing the doll carefully on his massive mahogany desk. "She dropped it at the diner that night." "You could have called," Alexander said, studying her face. "Margaret could have sent someone to pick it up." "I don't have your number," Emma replied with what Alexander was beginning to recognize as her characteristic straightforwardness. "And besides, I wanted to make sure that Sophia was okay." There was something about the way she spoke, precise, educated, that seemed inconsistent with her claimed background. Alexander had built his empire learning to read people, and this woman was far more complex than she appeared. "Have you been looking for work?" he asked, surprised by his own words. He hadn't planned to offer her anything, but something about her presence in his office felt right. Emma's posture stiffened slightly. "I can take care of myself, Mr. Reed. I didn't come here looking for charity." The defiance in her voice was almost amusing to Alexander. She was standing in his office wearing clothes that probably cost less than his lunch, and yet she was giving him attitude. When was the last time someone had spoken to him like that? "I wasn't offering charity," he said, and surprised himself by meaning it. "My assistant Margaret is overwhelmed with personal tasks. I need someone organized, discreet, and good with Sophia. The salary would be substantial." Emma studied his face carefully, looking for hidden motives or condescension. She had learned the hard way that powerful men always wanted something in return for their generosity. "What exactly would this job involve?" she asked. "Personal assistant work, managing my personal schedule, coordinating activities for Sophia, handling household matters." "Nothing inappropriate," he added quickly, noticing the slight wariness in her expression. Emma walked over to the window, looking out at a view that represented millions of dollars in real estate. She had stood in offices like this before, when her life was different. When she had been Emma Hartwell, daughter of a prominent Boston family, engaged to marry into one of the oldest law firms on the East Coast, before she discovered that her entire life had been a lie. "The truth is," she said finally, "I need work, but I don't need pity or rescue fantasies. If you're offering because you feel bad about what happened with Sophia, then no thank you." Alexander found himself genuinely laughing for the first time in months. "Has anyone ever told you that you're quite direct?" "It's been mentioned," Emma replied, and he caught a hint of a smile at the corners of her mouth. "Usually not as a compliment." "I find it refreshing," Alexander said honestly. Most people in his life told him exactly what they thought he wanted to hear. "To answer your question, I'm offering because Sophia hasn't stopped talking about you since that night. She asked if we could invite you for Christmas dinner." Emma felt something warm spread in her chest at the mention of the sweet little girl. "How is she? Really?" "She's better. That night scared me more than I'd like to admit. I hired a new nanny, implemented better security protocols, changed our entire routine." Alexander paused. "But more importantly, I've been trying to spend more time with her, like you suggested." The fact that he had actually listened to her advice, and more importantly, acted on it, surprised Emma. Most wealthy men she had known were too arrogant to take suggestions from anyone they considered beneath them. "That's good," she said simply. "Sophia is lucky to have you." "Am I?" Alexander asked, and there was something vulnerable in his voice that caught Emma off guard. "Sometimes I feel like I'm failing her completely." After her mother died. He stopped himself. This woman was a virtual stranger, and here he was sharing personal information that he rarely discussed with people he had known for years. Emma saw the pain that flashed across his features and felt her defensiveness soften slightly. Whatever his flaws as a parent, She could see that he genuinely loved his daughter and was struggling with a loss she could relate to better than he knew. "Children are resilient," she said gently, "and they forgive much more easily than adults do. Sophia knows you love her. Sometimes that's enough while you figure out the rest." Alexander stared at her for a long moment. "You speak like someone who knows." Emma's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She wasn't ready to share her own story of loss and betrayal. "I know that Sophia is a remarkable little girl who deserves to feel safe and loved. If you can provide that, you're doing better than many parents with a lot more experience." There was a knock on the door, and Margaret's voice came through the intercom. "Mr. Reed, your 2 o'clock appointment is here." Alexander realized that he didn't want this conversation to end. "The job offer stands," he said quickly. "Think about it." Emma walked to the door, then turned back. "Mr. Reed?" "That night when Sophia was missing. You looked genuinely terrified. That tells me more about what kind of father you are than anything else could." After she left, Alexander sat in his chair for a long time, staring at the spot where she had stood. He had met countless women over the years, businesswomen, socialites, models, but none of them had managed to make him question his priorities with just a few sentences. There was something about Emma Martinez that intrigued him, in a way that had nothing to do with physical attraction, although that was definitely present too, and everything to do with the intelligence behind her eyes and the quiet strength she carried herself with. 3 hours later, Alexander's private phone rang. "I'll take the job," Emma's voice said without preamble. "But I have conditions." 03. Emma's first day as Alexander's personal assistant began at 7 a.m. sharp on a Monday that was already proving to be unseasonably warm for January. She stood in front of the Olympus Tower, a building she had passed countless times during her previous life but never imagined she would work inside. The lobby was a testament to wealth and power. Marble floors that reflected crystal chandeliers, walls lined with original artwork that was probably worth more than most people's houses. "Ms. Martinez to see Mr. Reed," she told the impeccably dressed concierge behind a reception desk that looked like it belonged in a 5-star hotel. 47th floor, private elevator to the right," the man replied, his tone professional but warm. "Mr. Reed is expecting you." As the elevator climbed silently toward Alexander's domain, Emma reminded herself of the boundaries she had established during their phone conversation. This was strictly business. She needed the income, and he needed help with personal organization. Anything else would be a complication she couldn't afford, especially not with someone whose world was so different from hers. The elevator doors opened to reveal a reception area that was twice the size of her entire apartment. Margaret, a woman in her late 50s with perfectly styled gray hair and a crisp navy suit, stood up from behind a desk that could have doubled as a dining table. "Emma, I'm so glad Alexander found someone," Margaret said with genuine warmth. "I've been trying to balance his corporate schedule with Sophia's needs for months, and honestly, it's been overwhelming. He needs someone dedicated to his personal life." "I'm here to help with whatever you need," Emma replied. "Mr. Reed mentioned that there were specific tasks you wanted to transfer." "Oh, honey, there are more personal tasks than corporate ones. Coordinating Sophia's schedule, managing his social calendar, handling household staff, planning family events. Alexander is brilliant with business, but absolutely hopeless when it comes to domestic organization." Margaret lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Between you and me, the man owns 12 restaurants but doesn't know how to boil water." Emma couldn't help smiling at that. "I can work with that." "Alexander, Emma is here," Margaret called to what Emma assumed was his inner office. "Send her in," came his voice from behind imposing double doors. Alexander's private office was even more impressive than Emma had remembered. The space was dominated by a desk that could easily seat 8 people, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes and business awards. But what caught her attention today were the photographs scattered across his desk. Dozens of them, all of Sophia at various ages, and a few of a beautiful dark-haired woman that Emma assumed had been his wife. "You made it," Alexander said, standing up from behind his desk. He was wearing a gray suit that was clearly custom-tailored, but Emma noticed that his tie was slightly crooked, and there were circles under his eyes that suggested he hadn't slept well. "I said I would," Emma replied. "Where would you like me to start?" For the next hour, Alexander and Margaret walked Emma through a mountain of responsibilities that had been piling up. Sophia's school schedule, after-school activities, play dates with friends, Alexander's social obligations, charity galas, business dinners, family functions that he apparently attended reluctantly, household management for a penthouse that employed a staff of 6 people. "And then there are the holidays," Margaret said, pulling out a thick folder. "Alexander's family has expectations for Easter, Mother's Day, Christmas, Thanksgiving. Every event has to be coordinated for months in advance." Emma reviewed the paperwork, noting the level of detail involved. These weren't just family gatherings. They were productions that required event planning experience. "Your family is large?" she asked Alexander. "Large and opinionated," he replied dryly. "My mother has particular standards for how holidays should be celebrated. My sister has 3 children who all have specific dietary needs. My brother brings a different girlfriend to each event and expects me to remember their names and preferences." "It sounds exhausting," Emma said honestly. "It is," Alexander admitted, "which is why I usually send Margaret to deal with them and find ways to avoid most of it." Emma saw an opportunity. "What if, instead of avoiding them, we made these events easier for you? Better organization, clearer expectations, streamlined processes?" Alexander looked at her with interest. "You think you can handle my family?" "I think I can organize systems that make it less stressful for everyone involved," Emma replied. "But first, I need to understand what you actually want from these relationships. Not what your mother expects or what business protocol requires. What you want." The question caught Alexander off guard. When was the last time someone had asked what he actually wanted, particularly when it came to family? "I want Sophia to know her extended family and feel connected to something bigger than just us. But I also want to not dread every family gathering for the next 20 years. "That's manageable," Emma said with a confidence that surprised him. Over the next few hours, Emma dove into organizing Alexander's chaotic personal life, with an efficiency that was impressive. She created systems for Sophia's schedule that built in flexibility for spontaneous father-daughter time. She redesigned his social calendar to eliminate events that served no real purpose other than obligation. She reviewed contracts with household staff and found ways to improve communication and reduce redundancy. "You've done this type of work before," Alexander observed when she finished presenting a completely reorganized filing system for his personal documents. Emma paused. "I've always been organized. This is more than just being organized. This is strategic thinking, process optimization, executive-level planning." Alexander studied her carefully. "Where did you learn to do this?" "Does it matter?" Emma asked, meeting his gaze directly. "I'm doing the job you hired me to do." But Alexander was too sharp to let it go. Throughout the morning, he had noticed small things. How she had immediately understood complex scheduling software, how she had reviewed financial documents with understanding, how she spoke with a vocabulary that suggested education far beyond what a typical restaurant worker would have. "Have dinner with me," he said suddenly. Emma looked up from the papers she was organizing. "Excuse me?" "Dinner. Tonight. You, me, and Sophia. She's been asking when she'll see you again, and I—" He paused. "I'd like to know more about the woman who saved my daughter." Emma felt her chest tighten. Dinner with Alexander and Sophia sounded dangerously close to something that might make her care about people again. And caring about people had been the biggest mistake of her life. "I don't think that's appropriate, Mr. Reed. I work for you. It's just dinner, Emma, not a marriage proposal." Alexander's tone was light, but there was something more serious in his eyes. "Besides, you have to eat somewhere, and I guarantee our chef is better than whatever you were planning." The truth was that Emma had been planning to eat a peanut butter and jelly sandwich in her tiny kitchen while watching reruns of old movies. The thought of a home-cooked meal and time with sweet Sophia was genuinely tempting. "I suppose I could stay for dinner," she said carefully, but only because Sophia asked. Alexander's smile was answer enough. That evening, Emma found herself in Alexander's private dining room. a space that was surprisingly warm and inviting despite its obvious expense. Sophia had insisted on sitting next to Emma and was chattering excitedly about her school day, her dance lessons, and her plans for her upcoming 7th birthday party. "Emma, you should come to my birthday," Sophia announced while cutting into her chicken with a concentration that was adorable. "Daddy always makes it special, but this year, I want you there too." "Sophia, Emma might have other plans that day," Alexander said gently, but Emma caught him glancing at her with something that looked like hope. "Actually, when is your birthday, Sophia?" Emma asked. "March 15th, I'll be 7 and Daddy said I can have a princess party with a real castle bounce house." Emma felt her stomach drop. March 15th. The same day that, 3 years ago, had been supposed to be her wedding day to Marcus Blackwood. The day that her entire life had imploded when she discovered that her engagement had been arranged by their families to merge 2 law firms, and that Marcus had been openly cheating with her best friend for months. "Emma, you okay?" Alexander's voice brought her back to the present. He was looking at her with concern, having noticed how her face had gone pale. "I'm fine," she said quickly, forcing a smile for Sophia. March 15th sounds perfect for a birthday party. But Alexander wasn't convinced. Throughout dinner, he kept noticing small moments where Emma seemed to drift away, as if remembering something painful. He also noticed how easily she talked with Sophia about books, art, and school subjects that suggested a far more sophisticated education than she was admitting to. After dinner, while Sophia was in the living room watching a movie, Alexander and Emma found themselves alone in his kitchen, a space that was probably worth more than most people's cars, but felt surprisingly normal when it was just the 2 of them cleaning dishes. "You don't have to do that," Alexander said when Emma automatically began loading the dishwasher. "We have staff for that." "I'm used to cleaning up after myself," Emma replied. "Besides, I like to keep my hands busy when I'm thinking." "What are you thinking about?" Emma considered whether to be honest. "About how different this all is from what I expected when I took this job." "Different how?" "You're different, not what I expected," she said, handing him a plate to dry. "The way you are with Sophia, the way you actually listen when people talk to you. Most men in your position." "Most men in my position?" Alexander prompted when she trailed off. "Most men with money and power don't care about anyone else's opinions," Emma finished. "They definitely don't take parenting advice from strangers." Alexander considered this. Maybe because most strangers don't care enough to offer good advice. Or maybe because most people in my life tell me what I want to hear, rather than what I need to hear. They worked in comfortable silence for a few minutes, and Alexander found himself stealing glances at Emma. There was something almost meditative about the domestic simplicity of washing dishes together, something he had never experienced with any of the sophisticated women he had dated since his wife died. "Emma," he said carefully, "that night when you found Sophia, you said something about princesses needing time with their kings. Did you learn that from experience?" Emma's hand stilled on the plate she was washing. "What makes you think that?" "The way you said it. Like someone who understood disappointment." Emma felt her throat tighten. This man was too observant, too good at reading between the lines. "Everyone understands disappointment, Mr. Reed." "Alexander," he corrected softly. "And not everyone understands it the way you do. I can see it in your eyes sometimes. Something hurt you deeply." Emma turned to face him, water dripping from her hands. "And what makes you think that's any of your business?" "Maybe because I recognize it," Alexander said quietly. "I know what it looks like to be protecting yourself from being hurt again." For a moment they stood there looking at each other, and Emma felt something dangerous stirring in her chest. This was exactly what she had been afraid of, that she might start to care about him, to trust him, to let her guard down only to have it all fall apart again. "I should go," she said quickly, drying her hands. "It's getting late." "Emma, wait." Alexander's voice stopped her at the kitchen doorway. "Tomorrow is Saturday. Would you like to come with me and Sophia to the park? She's been asking, and I thought, if you're not busy." "I work for you, Alexander. You don't need to ask permission to include me in your daughter's activities." "I'm not asking as your employer," he said, taking a step closer to her. I'm asking because I'd like to spend time with you. Both of us would. Emma felt her resolve wavering. The sincerity in his voice, the way he looked at her as if she mattered, it was exactly what she had been trying to avoid. But when she thought about Sophia's bright smile and the way Alexander's entire demeanor softened whenever he talked about his daughter, she realized that maybe some risks were worth taking. Okay, she said finally. But only because Sophia asked. Alexander's smile was answer enough. 2 months into working as Alexander's personal assistant, Emma had fallen into a rhythm that felt dangerously close to belonging. Sophia had started calling her Emma Mom when she thought no one was listening, and Alexander had begun staying home for dinner more often than not. The three of them had developed an easy familiarity that Emma both treasured and feared, because she knew from experience how quickly happiness could be ripped away. It was a Thursday evening in March when everything began to unravel. Emma was in Alexander's home office, organizing travel documents for an upcoming business trip to London, when she overheard a phone conversation that made her blood run cold. "Alexander, you need to understand the implications here," came the voice of David Garrison, Alexander's business partner and oldest friend, through the speakerphone. "If this information about your assistant becomes public, it will destroy everything we've worked for. The Blackwood Group is our biggest competitor, and having Marcus Blackwood's ex-fiancée in your personal employ looks like industrial espionage." Emma's hands froze over the keyboard. How did David know about Marcus? She had been so careful to use her mother's maiden name, to hide all traces of her previous life. "What are you talking about, David?" Alexander's voice was sharp with confusion. "Emma Martinez is actually Emma Hartwell, daughter of Judge Robert Hartwell, former fiancé of Marcus Blackwood, and heir to a $200 million trust fund that was frozen when she broke their engagement. The girl has been lying to you for months, Alex. She's not some innocent waitress. She's a disgraced socialite with access to our confidential information." Emma felt the room spinning around her. Her carefully constructed new life was crumbling in real time, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. "That's impossible," Alexander said, but Emma could hear the doubt creeping into his voice. "Emma would have told me." Would she? Think about it, Alex. How convenient that she just happened to find Sophia that night. How quickly she integrated into your personal life. How easily she learned our business systems. This woman has been playing you from the beginning. Emma couldn't listen anymore. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door, but Alexander's voice stopped her. "Emma, wait. Is this true?" She turned to face him, seeing the betrayal and confusion in his gray eyes. Sophia was standing in the doorway behind him, looking between them with the confused expression of a child who sensed something wrong but couldn't understand it. "Yes," Emma said simply. "It's true. I was Emma Hartwell. I was engaged to Marcus Blackwood. And my father was Judge Robert Hartwell until he was arrested for taking bribes from Marcus's law firm." The silence that followed was deafening. Emma could see Alexander processing this information, could watch as everything they had built together transformed into suspicion in his mind. "You lied to me," he said quietly. "For months you lied. I used my mother's name because I needed to escape my past, not relive it," Emma replied, her voice steady despite the fact that her heart was breaking. "Everything else, my feelings for you, my love for Sophia, my commitment to this job, that was real. How do I know what's real anymore?" Alexander asked, and Emma could see him retreating behind the cold, business-like mask she hadn't seen since their first meeting. "How do I know you weren't sent by Marcus to get information about my companies? How do I know any of this wasn't planned?" "Because if you knew me at all, you'd know I would never use Sophia like that," Emma said, her composure finally cracking. "If you knew me at all, you'd know that loving you both was the first honest thing I've felt in 3 years." But Alexander was already pulling away, his businessman's paranoia taking over. "I think it's best if you leave. Tonight. Margaret can handle your responsibilities until I find a replacement." Emma looked at Sophia, who was now crying in the doorway, confused and scared by the tension she could feel but not understand. She wanted to run to the little girl, to comfort her, but she knew that would only make this harder. "Goodbye, Sophia," she said softly. Remember what I told you about princesses? They're brave even when they're scared. She walked past Alexander without looking at him again. As the elevator doors closed behind her, Emma finally allowed herself to cry for the second time in 3 years. The first had been when she discovered Marcus's betrayal. This time felt infinitely worse because this time she had actually allowed herself to hope. Meanwhile, in his office, Alexander stood staring out at the city lights, trying to reconcile the woman he had been falling in love with and the sophisticated heiress who had apparently been deceiving him. David's voice continued through the speakerphone, but Alexander was no longer listening. All he could think about was the look of genuine pain in Emma's eyes when she said loving him, and Sophia was the first honest thing she had felt in years. "Alex, are you listening? We need to do damage control immediately. If the business community thinks you've been compromised by a Blackwood plant." Alexander turned off the phone without responding. For the first time in his life, he wasn't sure if protecting his business empire was worth the cost. 3 weeks after Emma's departure, Alexander's life had returned to its previous state of controlled chaos. But something fundamental had shifted. Sophia asked about Emma every day, and Alexander found himself unable to concentrate on work, constantly replaying their last conversation and wondering if he had made a terrible mistake. It was Margaret who finally forced the issue. She knocked on his office door one Wednesday afternoon with an expression that Alexander had learned meant she was about to say something he didn't want to hear. "Alexander, we need to talk about Emma," she said, closing the door behind her. "There's nothing to discuss, Margaret. She lied about her identity. The situation was compromised." "Was it? Or did you let David's paranoia destroy something good?" Margaret sat down across from his desk, uninvited. "I've worked for you for 15 years, Alexander. I know when you're making business decisions and when you're making fear-based decisions. This was fear." Alexander looked up from his computer. "Emma withheld important information about her background. In my position, I can't afford to trust people who lie to me." "Did she lie? Or did she simply not share a traumatic part of her past that had nothing to do with you or your business?" Margaret's voice was gentle but firm. "Alexander, I've watched you these past 3 weeks. You're miserable. Sophia is miserable. And from what I've heard through the household staff, Emma Martinez has disappeared completely from her apartment." That caught Alexander's attention. "What do you mean, disappeared?" "I mean, her landlord says she moved out overnight 3 weeks ago and left no forwarding address. Her former co-workers at the bistro haven't seen her. It's like she vanished." Margaret leaned forward. "Alexander, what if David was wrong? What if Emma wasn't working for Marcus? What if she was just a young woman trying to rebuild her life after some kind of trauma?" The possibility that he had been wrong, that he had destroyed something precious out of unfounded suspicion, hit Alexander like a physical blow. He had built his empire on calculated risks and careful analysis, but when it came to Emma, he had reacted purely on emotion and fear. "I need to find her," he said, already reaching for his phone. "I already tried," Margaret replied. "But Alexander, if you're going to find Emma, you need to understand what you're looking for. You need to know the whole truth about what happened to her." It took Alexander's team of investigators exactly 48 hours to uncover the complete story of Emma Hartwell's fall from grace. What they found was not industrial espionage or calculated deception. It was a tragedy that made Alexander's stomach turn with guilt for ever doubting her. Emma Hartwell had been 20 years old when she discovered that her engagement to Marcus Blackwood was not a love story but a business merger. Her father, Judge Robert Hartwell, had been taking bribes from Blackwood and Associates for years, steering cases their way in exchange for guaranteeing Emma's marriage to Marcus. When Emma found Marcus in bed with her college roommate and discovered the web of corruption surrounding her entire life, she had tried to expose it all. The scandal had destroyed everyone involved. Her father was arrested and died in prison 6 months later. Her family's fortune was seized as evidence. Her mother suffered a mental breakdown and was still in a psychiatric facility in Boston. And Emma had been completely cut off. Her trust fund frozen, her reputation destroyed, and her former friends turning their backs when the money disappeared. Marcus Blackwood had not only walked away unscathed, he had used the scandal to position himself as a victim of the Hartwell family's corruption, actually growing his law firm's prestige while Emma lost everything. The final blow had been when Emma tried to finish her law degree and discovered that Marcus had used his influence to have her quietly expelled from Harvard for academic dishonesty, a charge that was completely fabricated but impossible to fight without resources. Alexander stared at the investigator's report until the words blurred together. Emma hadn't been deceiving him. She had been protecting herself from a world that had already destroyed her once. She had been Emma Martinez, working double shifts and living in poverty, not because she was running some long-term con, but because it was the only way she could survive after losing everything to the kind of powerful men she had every reason to distrust. "Find her," he told his head of security. "I don't care what it costs or how long it takes. Find Emma Martinez." But Emma had learned well how to disappear. She had spent 3 years perfecting the art of invisibility, and when she vanished from Manhattan, she did so completely. No credit card trails, no forwarding addresses, no digital footprints. Alexander's investigators could find no trace of where she had gone. Days turned into weeks, and Alexander found himself in an unfamiliar state of desperation. He had always been able to buy, negotiate, or leverage his way to any solution he needed. But Emma's absence was something that money couldn't fix and power couldn't reach. He started showing up at diners and restaurants throughout the city, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. He hired private investigators in Boston, Chicago, Los Angeles, anywhere she might have connections. It was Sophia who finally broke down completely. One evening, she sobbed in Alexander's arms for 2 hours, asking over and over why Emma had left without saying goodbye, why she never called, whether it was something Sophia had done wrong. "Daddy, you made Emma go away, didn't you?" Sophia asked with the devastating honesty of a 7-year-old. "She was happy with us, and then you made her sad and she left." Alexander realized that his daughter understood something he had been too proud to admit. He had destroyed the best thing that had happened to either of them because he had been too afraid to trust, too damaged by his own past losses to recognize genuine love when it was standing in front of him. That night, after Sophia finally fell asleep, Alexander sat in his empty penthouse and called the one person who might be able to help him understand what he had lost and how to get it back. Marcus Blackwood's office came the polished voice of a receptionist. "This is Alexander Reed. I need to speak with Mr. Blackwood immediately about Emma Hartwell." There was a pause, then, "I'm sorry, Mr. Reed, but Mr. Blackwood is not available to discuss personal matters with competitors." Alexander's jaw tightened. "Tell Mr. Blackwood that if he doesn't take this call, I will make it my personal mission to destroy his firm's reputation. I have questions about Emma Hartwell, and he's going to answer them." 20 minutes later, Marcus Blackwood called back personally. His voice carried the smooth confidence of a man who had never faced real consequences for his actions. "Alexander Reed, I should have known you'd eventually discover Emma's true identity. I hope you didn't let sentiment cloud your judgment where business is concerned." "What did you do to her?" Alexander asked directly. "I did what any reasonable man would do when he discovered his fiancée was the daughter of a corrupt judge. I protected my firm's reputation and my own future. Emma was collateral damage. She tried to expose the corruption. She was trying to do the right thing." Marcus laughed, a cold sound that made Alexander's hands clench into fists. Emma was naive. She thought she could maintain her lifestyle while simultaneously destroying the very networks that provided it. When she chose conscience over comfort, she made her choice. I simply ensured that choice had appropriate consequences. You destroyed her life out of spite. I protected my interests, just as you did when you discovered who she really was and removed her from your employ. We understand each other, Reed. Powerful men like us can't afford to let sentiment compromise our positions." Alexander felt something snap inside his chest. "I am nothing like you, Blackwood, and Emma Martinez is worth more than both of our empires combined." He hung up and immediately called his head of security. "Double the search for Emma. I don't care if we have to hire every investigator in the country. Find her and find her now." But what Alexander didn't know was that Emma had already found him. Emma stood in the shadow of the Torres Olympus building, watching through the lobby's floor-to-ceiling windows as Alexander paced frantically while talking on his phone. She had been back in Manhattan for 2 weeks, staying in a modest hotel under an assumed name, trying to find the courage to face the man who had broken her heart and the little girl she still loved like her own daughter. The past month in California had given her time to heal and, more importantly, to plan. She had reached out to an old friend from Harvard, one of the few who had remained loyal after her family's scandal, who now worked as an investigative journalist for the New York Times. Together, they had uncovered evidence that would finally bring down Marcus Blackwood and his corrupt empire once and for all. But revenge, she had discovered, felt hollow when the people you loved were suffering. Through carefully placed sources, she had learned that Alexander had been searching for her desperately, that Sophia was inconsolable, and that he had completely withdrawn from his social life and was working himself into exhaustion. The problem was that Emma didn't know if Alexander was looking for her because he genuinely loved her, or because he felt guilty about how their relationship had ended. And after 3 years of rebuilding herself from nothing, she couldn't afford to be wrong about love again. Her phone buzzed with a text from her journalist friend Sarah. "Story goes live tomorrow at 6 a.m. Marcus Blackwood's firm will be finished by noon. Are you ready for this?" Emma typed back, "Ready. Thank you for believing in me." Now came the hard part, finding out if Alexander Reed was worth fighting for. She waited until evening when she knew Alexander would be home with Sophia, then made her way to the private elevator that led to his penthouse. Her hands shook slightly as she pressed the button for the 48th floor, remembering the last time she had made this journey. The elevator opened directly into Alexander's living room, where she found him sitting on the couch with Sophia, reading a bedtime story. The sight of them together, Alexander's deep voice bringing fairy tale characters to life while Sophia leaned against his shoulder, nearly broke Emma's resolve. This was exactly what she had been trying to protect herself from missing. "Emma!" Sophia's shriek of joy pierced the quiet evening as she launched herself from the couch into Emma's arms. "Emma, you came back. Daddy said he couldn't find you, but I knew you would come back." Emma held the little girl tight, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo and feeling a piece of her heart slot back into place. "I missed you so much, Princess." Alexander stood slowly, his face cycling through emotions Emma couldn't read. Relief, anger, hope, fear, they all flickered across his features before settling into wariness. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "Yes, we do. But first, Sophia needs to finish her story and go to bed," Emma replied, settling onto the couch with the little girl still in her arms. "What were we reading?" For the next 30 minutes they read together like a family, with Sophia curled between them and both adults acutely aware of each other's presence. When Sophia finally fell asleep against Emma's shoulder, Alexander carefully carried his daughter to her bedroom, while Emma waited in the living room, preparing for a conversation that could either heal their relationship or destroy it permanently. "Now," Alexander said when he returned, closing Sophia's door softly behind him. "Are you going to tell me the truth this time? All of it?" Emma sat down across from him, maintaining eye contact. "Yes. But first, you need to know that tomorrow morning Marcus Blackwood's law firm will be exposed for a decade of corruption, bribery, and client fraud. The story will be front page of the New York Times." Alexander's eyes widened. "How do you know that?" "Because I'm the one who provided the evidence. For the past month, I've been working with investigative journalists to expose the network of corruption that destroyed my family. Marcus thought he had buried the truth deep enough that it would never surface. He was wrong." "You've been planning this revenge for 3 years?" "No," Emma said firmly. "I've been trying to survive for 3 years. The revenge part only became possible when I realized I had something to fight for again." Alexander leaned forward. "What changed?" "You did, you and Sophia." Emma's voice softened. "For the first time since my world fell apart, I cared about something more than just protecting myself. I cared about you both enough to want to clear my name, to prove that I wasn't the duplicitous woman you thought I was. Emma, I never should have doubted you. The moment David told me about your past, I should have asked you directly instead of assuming the worst." Alexander ran his hands through his hair. "I've been tearing myself apart for weeks, knowing I made the biggest mistake of my life. You protected yourself and your daughter from what you perceived as a threat. I can't fault you for that." Emma stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the city where both their lives had been forever changed. But I need to know, Alexander, when you look at me now, do you see Emma Martinez, the woman who loves you and Sophia? Or do you see Emma Hartwell, the disgraced heiress who might be dangerous to your empire? Alexander joined her at the window, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. I see the woman who sacrificed her own warmth to save my daughter. I see the woman who taught me how to be a better father. I see the woman who made me realize that all the money and power in the world means nothing without someone to share it with. He turned to face her fully. Emma, I've been in love with you since the night you told me I needed to spend more time with Sophia. Not because you were beautiful or convenient or available, because you were brave and honest and you cared more about my daughter's well-being than about impressing me. Emma felt tears starting to form. Alexander, I need you to understand something. The Emma Hartwell who existed 3 years ago was weak and naive and dependent on other people to give her life meaning. The Emma Martinez who fell in love with you is someone I created from scratch. Someone stronger, someone who knows what she wants and isn't afraid to fight for it. What do you want? Alexander asked, reaching up to touch her face gently. I want to build a life with you and Sophia. I want to be part of your family, not as your employee or your charity case, but as your equal partner. I want to help you raise that incredible little girl and maybe give her some brothers and sisters someday. Alexander's smile was like sunrise after the darkest night. Emma Martinez, will you marry me? Are you proposing because you feel guilty, or because you love me? She asked, even as her heart was racing with hope. I'm proposing because life without you has been unbearable. I'm proposing because Sophia needs you, and I need you, and together we make sense in a way that I never thought was possible. Alexander dropped to one knee right there in his living room, pulling a ring from his pocket that Emma realized he must have been carrying for weeks. I'm proposing because I love you, all of you, including the parts of your story that are painful and complicated. Emma looked down at this powerful man kneeling before her, offering her everything she had thought she could never have again, and realized that sometimes the greatest risk was also the greatest reward. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Alexander Reed, I will marry you. When they told Sophia the next morning, her screams of excitement could probably be heard 3 floors down. And 6 months later, when Emma Martinez became Emma Reed in a garden ceremony, attended by Sophia's friends and the family that Alexander had learned to prioritize, the society pages noted that it was the first wedding in Manhattan history where the bride's past scandal only made the love story more compelling. Marcus Blackwood, by then, was too busy dealing with federal fraud charges to attend or cause any further trouble. Justice, Emma learned, was sweetest when it came in the form of building something beautiful from the ashes of what had been destroyed. And when their son was born 2 years later, followed by twin daughters, Alexander would often catch Emma reading bedtime stories to their children and remember the night she had saved not just Sophia, but all of them, from the cold.